Okay, so welcome to the main painting for this session. So our previous session was an exercise where we looked at a rose and we practiced some even washes with quite intense colour, and we simplified the whole rose into the light side and the dark side, and very starkly put in a whole wash over the whole rose for the light side, and then put in a wash for all the dark pieces, and then finally added in slight variations in value to put in these slight curves of the petals and slight variations in value on the light side for the petals. And the main thing here was to make sure that our light side, all the values in here, were lighter than all the values on the dark side, because a rose is a three-dimensional object and it has form, and even though it's got these little petals coming out, we need everything to be dark on the shadow side, light on the light side, otherwise we'll lose the form. These are another couple of ones I did a couple of days ago, just practicing. This one I kept it very dark on the shadow side, and then this one I tried to get it slightly lighter on the shadow side. The camera actually makes it look darker than it is in real life, but then you have to be very careful on this light side not to go too dark so you don't lose the form. So let's have a crack at the main thing. I've drawn this out fairly simply, and the contour of the roses is quite simple. We may go back in afterwards just to put in some little crinkles that we found actually made the rose look more rose-like if we did that. And I've put light marks with a blue-grey watercolor pencil just where the lights are, and where the lights hit the darks. So these pieces I've outlined. I haven't put any detail up in the lights up here. I'm going to ignore that, just where the darks, where the transition goes from the dark to the light. This one's slightly tricky because we have some, this isn't actually an edge of a petal, it's shadow coming through, but I've changed that so this will look like a petal that's rolling over. So here we've got, this is a light part next to the dark. This is dark here. This is probably part of the light, but I put this rollover petal in just because it's got part of this whole zigzag thing that gives the rose its character. I've left out this one down here because I tried this before and it just didn't, there's not enough information there to make it look good, so I've left that one out. And this one I've left the light side bare and just put in again where the darks hit the lights, hits the light. Okay, I've lightly marked in some leaves, but not too much. Okay, let me just stick it back up there. So let's get going with our initial washes. And we're going to do as we did in the exercise. We're going to mix up the light side colour, and I would suggest you do one at a time. And I hope as you go through you will learn from each one, and I hope by the end it feels natural to paint them this way. Right, now a brush. Now, like we did in the exercise, I'm going to start with a damp brush. Just going to dab it lightly so it's damp, but it's not dripping with water, but also I haven't wrung it out completely, so it's completely dry. Now we'll start with this top one again. Go in with our brush, a damp brush, and I've got the tip of the brush with pigment, and I work it out onto the palette. And it shouldn't be dripping with water, but there should be enough water in there just to keep the paint flowing. And if I put my brush like that, you can see it kind of dribbles down. Now this needs some orangey red. So that was my pinkish red, my quinacridone rose. And now this is vermilion, or a bit of cadmium red would be fine. Okay, and I might just test this on a corner of paper just to see that we've got roughly the right value. Okay, so that's nice. Right, we're going to use that, and there should be enough. I'm wondering whether there's enough pigment. I'm just going to put a bit more pigment in. It's quite a big rose up there. A bit more quinacridone rose, bit more vermilion or cad red, and I'm just going to add a tad more water, and it's just dipping the tip of the brush into the water. Just add a little more. It's not ladling brushfuls of water onto the palette, and that consistency looks good. So let's go in, and we have to work fairly quickly because it will dry, and our aim, as before, is just to touch the paper once with the brush so we get a nice even wash over the body of the rose. And we're just going to go over the whole thing, and my blue-grey watercolour pencil should stay there long enough so it won't disappear, the lines won't disappear. Yeah, just about. And because it's wet enough, I can go back in and fill in the colour, and it doesn't leave a stripe. And I don't know if you can see, when I lift my brush up, it leaves just a little pool of pigment. And when it does that, it tells me it's going to be wet enough not to go stripy. There we go. So that's our first rose. And we're going to let it dry and then go back in with our dark. Actually, I know I said we would do one at a time, but I suppose we're going to let this dry, so let's do another one whilst we're here, just while that other one is drying. The first washes should be relatively easy to put on. So a bit of quinacridone rose, a bit of vermilion or cad red. Right, so that's slightly too thick. I don't know if you can see, it's good. It's the consistency of the paint is slightly too thick, but you need very little water. I'm just dipping the brush and then going back in. It's a subtle change, and now it just kind of falls down the palette. This is a sable brush, and I noticed before when I was using the synthetic brush that the synthetic brushes don't hold as much water as sable, so you need to dip your brush slightly further in, but like between a third and a half of the way in. Right, let's do this one over here. I'm starting over on the left as I'm right-handed. And as you pull the brush is pretty, I'm using the whole of the brush bristles, and as you pull the colour across, you shouldn't get sparkles. And when you lift the brush up, let me just show you, get that little drip that comes down, so the paint is slightly wet but not overly watery. And I'm just trying to remember, just checking back to the photo because I don't want to go over my leaves. That seems a bit weird, but okay, I think that's okay. And there's no detail on it at the moment, so they're going to look very, very flat, and my watercolour pencil is just about showing through. Using a pencil to draw them out is fine at this point. Right, now this one is almost dry, so I think let's go back and do this one and at least get it to a fairly finished state before we try the next one. If this was what I call a proper painting, I probably wouldn't do this. I would do the initial washes for all of them first. and then go back and do the second layer. But this is kind of a learning process, so if something doesn't work out on the first one, I'm hoping you can reformulate your plan for the next one. Right, now, okay, that's dry enough. So the wash is fairly even. There's some variations in there, but that's fine. And we now want to go in and just use our darker colour and put in the dark areas. Now, it's really easy to start painting over the bits you don't want to paint. The bits that are most important are these bits, these diagonal light pieces here. So this piece needs to be light, that piece needs to be light, all this up here will be left. This is dark, this is light. So just go through. Actually, there's a light piece there. I'm just going to mark that in. There's a light piece here. Also needs to go in. It's really easy to paint over the bits you don't want to paint. Right, now let's mix up our dark colour. I'm going to start again with a damp brush, just lightly dabbed so it's not sopping wet, and I'm dipping my brush in the paint, the tip of it, and then working it out on the palette. I'm not adding in any extra water right now, unless it's really so stiff it's not moving. But these are nice and moist, so it's fine. And then a little bit of our vermilion. So we come back basically to the colour we had before. Now we want to darken it up a bit. Now as we want to, this is kind of an exercise painting, so we want to make sure we get a dark and a light. So I'm going to darken it with a little bit of ultramarine. And okay, and then a little bit of burnt umber. I'll just warm it back up again. And okay, yeah, I'm going to go with that. And I think it's slightly too stiff. It's not flowing on the palette like I would like, so just the tip of the brush goes into the water. It's really surprising how little water you need. And now we're going to keep the light side without any detail. We're just going to put paint on the dark side. And I usually start at a light dark boundary, and my point of my brush goes into the light dark boundary. So I'm going to start in one of these zigzag places. And again, try and just touch the paper once. And if the paint is the right consistency, I'm wondering whether that's dark enough now. It's going to be a very subtle rose, this one. It looks very dark on the camera, but it's not. Right, and then this one, I've got to be careful to go around this. But once we get into the dark side down here, no detail, just a nice even wash. And keeping the washes even is really important at this point, because if we don't have it even, we won't be able to go back in and put in those subtle value changes that show the very subtle value changes as the petals curve around the rose. Right, okay, and it won't, I'm not painting to the painting at the moment. I'm not looking at the painting and saying, well, it needs this, this and this. I'm painting to the values that I can see. When we come back in and put in the final value marks, we will paint to the painting. But I'm not trying to make it look perfect right now. So you have to trust your observation and trust your knowledge of the form, And then you'll have a good, we're kind of making the framework for our rose at the moment. There we go. Now, actually that doesn't look too bad. You see these lights and these darks? And we've left this completely flat, but we're getting some sense of form already, which is great. But it'll look slightly cartoonish because in real life there isn't an absolute value change from the dark to light. There is some variation there, but we can put that in later. Right, now this one over here on the left, let me bring the photo down. I'm going to keep basically most of this light here. I know there's a lot of detail in here, but I'm going to cut the whole thing in half and just paint these darks. And there's quite a lot of, there's this little light bit here, so there's that dark bit that goes in there. So it's going to be quite jagged, but it's going to be a hard change between light and dark over here. Right, and I can just about see my watercolor marks. So there's this bit that comes down here. Like so. And then the bottom bit of it, I'm just going over and filling in, no detail down here. Okay, just wondering if there are any, if there are some darks in here, we can always go back in. I'm just going to put in this bit up here that is slightly darker, very slightly darker. Just gives a slight bit of form in there. Right. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. And it's kind of sort of graphic, cartoonish almost, but you can see that there is some form there already. And that's the thing we need to have at the base of our painting. And be very careful in later layers we don't lose that. Right, quick clean of the palette, and then we'll do the other two the same way. Right, so damp brush, lightly dabbed on a piece of paper towel, point of brush in the pigment. Now I haven't actually done roses with pan paints. If you're using pan paints, it is harder to get the amount of pigment on the brush, so you will be probably scrubbing away a bit more. Right, now consistency of the paint, it's falling down the palette but not very fast, so just tip of the brush in the water. And then, yes, it's falling. And again, we go over the whole of the rose. And the tip of my brush goes to the hard edges, which is going to be the outside. And that beautiful intensity of colour. It's a balance of getting enough pigment on the palette and then just enough water to make it flow. You don't want to have enough water but not enough pigment. Now that's a bit wet there, that's actually light. I'm going to risk that. Okay. Now, one thing I was going to say, if this was a proper painting, air quotes, I would be losing some edges here. I would be softening some edges, certainly around the outside of the rose. We're not doing that today. because frankly roses are hard enough as it is. Right, I've left a little bit of white there, but I'm not going to go back in because I'm probably going to ruin that nice wash. And I think I just about have enough paint left for this one. Now if you go through all this and the colour isn't intense enough, I would recommend that you don't go in while it's wet and try and drop more pigment in. I would recommend, if it is too pale, put it down, let it dry, and then go back in with a second coat, as it were. Ideally, getting it right first time is always good. Okay. Right. So that's that. Let's mix up some more dark and put in the darks on these ones. I'm just going to clean my palette and ready for the dark paint. All right, now it's just about dark, just about dry enough, I think. Another thing about doing a group of roses, I think I mentioned this before, but doing a single rose is actually the hardest thing to do. Because you have no context to tell you what it is. Doing a whole bunch of them, you can be a little looser, a little less accurate, and a little broader with your brush strokes, because they will be surrounded. So the leaves and the fact there's 4 of them will indicate that it's a flower, and it can be more interesting to paint because you have a bit more latitude. All right, now. Again, mix up some pigment, grab a rose, vermilion. Right, check the consistency. That's, hang on, I'm doing darks, aren't I? Sorry, I got in a bit of a rut there. So let's darken this up a little bit. A bit of ultramarine, and you want to make this dark so you can you can see that there's a difference. You don't want it to be so dark that it's you know, it's like a notan or something. It's completely black and white. But you want there to be an obvious change between the light side and the dark side. Right, there's my paper. Yeah, that's. And if you're going to err, this time through, if you're going to err on any side, err to the dark side, because it is so easy to lose the lights and darks. Right, now, before I put my brush down, I'm just checking I know where my lights are in here, across there, over here. Right, okay, let's go in. And I tend to go in with what I consider the most important light shade boundary there is, which I think is this one over here. Just trying to touch the paper once. Now this is one of these little zigzag dark bits in here. And this goes, actually this comes around here. And if the darks or the lights go across petals, I ignore the petal boundaries and just paint them as such. Now, this is where I have to get my hand into a weird position for this zigzag piece here. And the watercolour pencil seems to be working quite well. And there's that bit. Now I think this should be dark here. go. Yep, that looks good. Now this piece in here, I'm not going to make that dark. I could make it slightly dark and then smooth. Actually, I might do that. It's not necessarily going to be a hard line every time. So I'm just putting a little bit of the colour at the bottom and then taking a clean damp brush and just dragging that across the top so it blends upwards and fades out. There we go. Or you could leave that one and then put that one in later. Okay. Now our final one. Now this is somehow one of the trickiest ones because it's the simplest. So let's put in our major light dark lines, which is that one there and around here and across here. Just the edge of that one showing. Then these little triangular bits at the edge. And finally let's fill in. There is a little bit of light down there. Maybe I will just leave a small piece of light there. And then leave this bit completely at the top. And there we go. Now it's looking very stark, but I think it is looking like roses. So I'm just going to pause this for a moment and let them all dry. And then we'll go in and start putting some detail and slight value changes on the dark side first, just to show some of the curves of those petals. Okay, so I'm just putting it on pause. Okay, so we've let it dry, and at this point we've got the bones of the flowers in. We've identified the light sides, the dark sides. We have even washes for the lights and nice even washes for the darks. And if you can get to this point and it looks rose-like, and I think we do have some rose-like forms appearing here, that's a great achievement in itself. They don't look finished, but if it's not, and it should look kind of almost cartoonish at this point because there's no subtlety to the marks, but the bones are there. So if you can get it to look like this at this point, this is a really good goal to have. And if you can do this bit, the next bit should be, well, you still have to be careful, but it's a lot easier. So now I was gonna carry on and put the darkest darks into our dark sides of roses. What I think I might do actually is I discovered that, just moving back, the contours of the outside of the flower are very important to make it look rose-like, and I've been pretty broad here. And if you look at the photo, there's a lot of little kicky, jaggedy bits around the edges of the rose. I'm actually going to go back in and add some of those in, and I think you'll find it will really add to the sense of it being a rose. And I'm going to use a synthetic for this, and it's an Escoda Perla number 12, because I want to be precise. It has a lovely point, and we're not doing washes, we're just doing little edge pieces, but I'm going to mix up the colour the same way. So quite a rose, a little bit of vermilion, just we've got an orangey red, so it's not one or the other. That's slightly too thick, so it's not travelling down the palette. I'm just going to dip my brush in, maybe a little more. This is a synthetic, so you might need a couple of dips, but really is just a couple of dips. And I'm just going to go around the edge of this rose, and I'm looking at the photo, and just now your colour has to match reasonably. Just adding in some interest on these edges, because they're not perfectly smooth and they can be quite spiky. Now I'm leaving bits of paint here, and I will come in soon with a damp brush just to soften those edges, because we don't want it to look painted on, and this should be very dry by now. Right, there we go. And as you go round, I think you'll find that it starts looking much more flower-like. This is quite kind of graphic, this kind of painting. That's kind of sharp up there, so I'm going to put in a bit of sharp. I'm going to leave that one. And even just that little bit has rosed it up a bit. I won't do the darks because this is just the light side paint, but let's do this one over here. So this is very straight, and it's, if you look at the photo, it's not very straight. We could have done this at the beginning, but I was so concentrating on getting an even wash that I didn't want to take too much time and leave it to the wash with stripes. So I'm just looking at the photo and looking to see where there's just slight variations in edges. I'm not looking at individual petals again, just the edge. Oh, I think I missed a bit there. It should come out. Right. Yeah, I think that's okay. This one again up here isn't a smooth edge. It's kind of jagged. Some smooth bits. Some contours. Let's change that a little. Yeah. And then this bit comes out quite a bit. I was amazed how many straight lines there are in flowers. And over here, I might emphasize things. That's green in there, so I'm going to leave that. And this one, yeah, so it's got some unevenness to the edges, but they're actually spikier. If you look at the photo, there's quite a lot of spikiness going on. Yeah, so your smoothing brush will need to be washed out quite a bit. And over here, there's actually that should be end of light. Okay, I'll just mix up some dark and do the same on the dark side. I'm hoping that will rose them up a bit. Right, up here. Some really quite interesting shapes up here. Going around. I'm just looking at the edge of the rose. The thing about simplifying is you only simplify bits of it. It's knowing which bits to simplify and which bits you need to keep. And the edges you really do need to keep. This chap over here. It's not too bad, that one. This one's hard to see because it's next to the leaves, but I think we should put in some indication of, well, maybe not. Maybe that's fine. And then this one is actually quite smooth. It's slightly out of focus in the photo as well, which doesn't help matters when you're trying to see things. Right. Gonna leave that. Okay. Yeah, it's still looking stark because we've got a lot of hard edges in there. And one of the last things we may do is go in and destroy some of these edges, which this paint and paper should be fine with. Okay. Right, so that's our basis. They kind of look rose-like, but they don't have that sort of softness and elegance that roses actually do. So this is what we need to work on now. And the first thing we're going to do, we're going to go back into our darks and referencing the photo, put in a slightly darker value right in the depths of the flower to give it a little more form and a little more interest in those darks. So I'm going to get, I think I'm going to use this pointy synthetic again. And you should be used to mixing up this colour by now. So, oops, cracking a rose. I do need some more water right now. Vermilion. Alright, Ultramarine Blue. Now, I'm going to go darker than this because we're getting real darks now. And I'm using a pointy synthetic because we're not putting on washes. Because the darkest darks, they're in much smaller areas than these sort of washy areas. We're just going to touch the brush in areas and then smooth out the edges. So let me just show you on the photo. Let's look at this top one here. So there's a very dark piece right next to this curled over petal here, but it blends out into the rest of this dark over here. So we're just going to touch dark bits of paint in here and then smooth it out, take with a clean damp brush so it fades out gracefully. Now, let's see, and I'm just going to place a small bit of paint just in a small area, smaller than I actually want it to cover, because when it blends out it will obviously spread. Now I'm going to have a clean damp brush, dab it on a paper towel. I'm just going to pull the brush across the paper where I want it to blend, but the tip just dips into the dark paint and you'll get a very subtle value change. Now these start to add up the more you put in, so you need to go through and identify first the most important ones, and they're usually in the sort of points of these little zigzaggy bits, the changeover areas, because that's where the light is excluded from. And I'm going to do some under here. So this petal does curl over, it comes down here, And also this over here. I'm going to smooth out this side, smooth out that side. And I think you can see that on the screen. It's a very, very subtle value change. And all of them add up to showing the slight petal curvatures underneath. I don't like that bit there. Alright, again, so again there's another, this is going to be dark in here. And it's dark, but it's not hugely darker than what we already had down. I'm just going to use my point there. And then this goes. And we're not attempting an accurate replica of what the rose is, but indicating how the values change on it. And I'm starting to see some structure in there. I think you can. It is kind of hard to see on the screen. I'm sorry about that. It'll be easier to see when we get to do the light side. Maybe I should do the light side on one of these first. And a little bit of dark in there. And at this point you can stand back from your painting and start to work with it. These light pieces will still look slightly stuck on, but the dark side should be showing some subtle form in there. Alright, I'm just gonna right, so I'm going to leave that one for the dark side. I'm going to work on this light side. So this is the hardest bit. We want to put some colour on here because there's some really nice value changes up here in the light side. However, if we go too dark, we will lose the whole form and you just end up with a blob. So we have to be very careful and very, very subtle. It's almost hard to be too subtle here. So I'm going to mix up, and this is our original wash colour, our quinacridone rose and our vermilion, but I'm going to add in water. This is 2 brush tipfuls because I only want a very, very subtle change here. Now I'm going to go in and this is basically by eye. Just add in some of those value changes in the light side. And you can be really quite broad here, it doesn't have to be. And you don't need many of them. I'm not drawing petals, I'm drawing shapes there. I think I've just about got away with that. That is maybe almost too dark. In fact, I'm going to just add a bit more water in there. Now at the top. Oh yeah, that's a bit better. I'm just looking at the photo, looking where the slight value changes are. And I'm lost where I am. I do tend to lose where I am. And you may want to, if there's some soft edges as well as hard edges, you may want to soften with your softening brush, which I'm just about to do. Yeah, that's got a softening brush. Ooh, it's all dark in there. Right. Yeah. I think that's just about worked. In fact, I'm not going to do any more on that one right now. Because I think I've almost lost the form. Right, let's try. Actually, let's do the lights, because I'm not sure on the camera you can see what I'm doing. Just gonna. This is getting more and more watery because I don't want this to go too dark. So that's actually the top of the petal there, so I'll go around. Sorry. I hope you can't hear that, my stomach's rumbling. You don't have to make it look like anything. And if you feel you're losing the form, stop. I am actually thinking I'm losing the form on this one, so I'm going to stop. Just going to pick up that small piece of pigment there. I don't want it to drop. Right, now this one here. This one I'm going to do really quite broadly now. There's a lot of detail up here. These very closely furled petals. And we want to indicate that, but we don't want to do everything. So I'm going to do this quite caligraphically. I hope this is going to work by just putting small marks around here. Just to show the top of that. Just the little dark pieces as the petals poke out. Then as you move outwards, the dark pieces get slightly bigger. And then around the front, really quite broad. And smooth that, because the front petals, we can see a lot more of the front petals. And we can't see the back petals. I think that's okay, and I'm just gonna put that colour on here, just to tie them together. Stand back. This is where I have to stand back a lot. Well, maybe. This one over here. These edge petals are actually quite dark. And in here. concentrating, so I'm not talking very much. This one I've always found to be the hardest one. So, right, okay, I'm gonna leave the light sides and then do the dark sides. But at every point you can still see there's a light side and a dark side. Right, let's do these in here. I think I might have read this photo wrong. It might be leaves down here, but anyway, it's what we have now. It is how it is. These little bits of dark, and this is where your smoothing brush comes into its own. So just dot the darks into the crevices and use your other brush to make sure the edges smooth out. And don't be tempted to start putting darks at the top. Alright, okay. Now this one, now I can see the darks a lot more easily on this one. I think I'm going to need some more. Shows the edge of this leaf petal. Doing flowers. And this one comes here. There's a bit of dark just at the sides of here, and just a couple. That's a bit too damp, that one. Yeah, you see, I've gone into my light side, and I probably shouldn't have done. Here. Now, it may look as though we're coming to the end of these flowers, but there's one crucial thing we have to do. And this should really bring them all alive. And I found that I can't, I wish I could do this as I went along, but I can't. I have to wait until I get to this stage and make sure all my darks are in the right place and all my lights are in the right place. And then I can go in and do it. Okay. And that's kind of dark down there actually. I haven't put any stalks or leaves in yet. We'll do that in a bit. Okay. Now, I think that's okay. They do look kind of stuck on, which is, it is by design, since we're not dealing with soft edges or lost edges on the edges of the flowers. But, kind of looks okay. But the thing that really really brings them to life is now these little these light stripes. These are the edges of the petals. They're rolling over into the light and the light is catching them. They're not a single value. If you look at the photo, let's look at this one. You see there's a very slight value change across it. And we haven't got that at all. They're very flat. So the final thing for them is to go in and just very lightly add in some value changes on these edges. And it's very, very subtle. So I'm just going to pull the brush. And you should probably wait until this is dry. Right, so I've got about half a brush full of water because I want this to be quite watery because I don't want a huge value change here. I'm just going across the edges of these petals. That adds in just a slight subtle changes. Sometimes you want, there's actually quite a big shadow on that one, so that one can go in. But there's a subtle change there, and you may want to soften some of your edges sometimes. Yeah, it just adds that final touch. But again, you can't go too dark because you still want to keep these lovely zigzag bits. Just add in some marks, just make that slightly darker down there. And at this point I really am painting to the painting and not to the photograph. I'm looking at the photograph to see what's going on, but I'm putting a mark down and then I'm leaning back and seeing what else it needs. And if it works out, the roses kind of shimmer. Let's do this front one. Soften the edge. Slightly darker there. Just some marks to almost just break up those edges. Maybe a bit more down here. These ones over here. This one rolls over, so this one. And so the ones in the light are tricky because the value changes are really quite subtle already. It's hard to do. Alright, I think I might start thinking about stopping. If you're putting stuff down and it's not getting better, it's usually time to stop. Let's put a few on here. There'll be slight value changes as the petals roll into the shade. Actually, I'm not sure I do want to do any more on those. I'm going to stand back and see what else could be done here. Yeah, well, there are some things that stand out. This one is standing out. This one. Just these intersections where the petals cross. They're not reading quite right to me. Right, okay. I think I'm going to leave those roses for now. Let's put some leaves in. Now they're not quite as broad as I would do them usually. But I think they're okay. In fact, I might do this at the end. What I sometimes do is I go back in and just remove a lot of the hard edges and smush them all together. But let's do some leaves first. Right, leaves. Now, there's a whole mess of leaf down here. And they're mostly this colour. Let me just clean this. But there's some darker stuff in there. So let's mix up a lighter green and put some leaves in. Alright, now green. I might get my little colour checker out. If I can find it. Right, now leaves. It's a yellowy green. Leaves are generally a yellowy green, so I'm going to start with a big wodge of Hansa yellow. I'm going to put a little bit of black in, which will make it into a kind of an olive green, which isn't bad for this painting actually. I don't mind that at all, but let's just put some blue in. So this is cobalt. I'm just putting a little blue in, just to give back some chroma. Yeah, a bit more yellow. Okay, so I don't want it to be too bright. And we're just going to roughly paint in some individual leaves, but also we don't want to paint individual leaves pretty much down here because it's just a mess of leaf. So let's start with this one. And this is a big brush. This is Skoda 12, so we should be able to do this quite broadly. And just touch around. I suppose some green in here. Let's put that green bit in. There's this leaf down here. I'm doing the edge leaves, the ones that stick out, the ones that you can see. I'm not giving them much detail. I don't think we need much detail for these. And a nice squishy brush is good, because you can start with the tip and then smush it out and get the whole shape of the leaf with a single brush stroke. Oh, actually I think it goes up in here, doesn't it? Alright, now now this will be very, very broad. I'm not drawing leaves because it's basically it's all green up there. So, and I'm not worried about the stalks because we can put those in later. Right, and there we go, like so for that one. And then here, and I want it. I don't. The subject is the roses, so I don't really care about the leaves, poor little leaves. And it's just a single colour at the moment. We will go in with some extra darks in a bit, but not quite yet. Fun, this bit. I want to leave some. There are some little light bits in there, but there's not a huge number of them. And I'm wondering whether green up here. I'll just put a little bit of green up here because I want these flowers to be connected a bit more. I think I'm going to get even broader down here. And just put in, these are just green marks. I'm not colouring it in, but I'm also not drawing individual leaves anymore, unless one happens to poke out, which it does do. Right, and the leaves aren't touching the flowers a huge amount, but I think it's good for the composition that they do. So I'm just putting in extra ones that touch the roses, some are here and there. Right, so that's our first green, and it's not looking too bad actually. And now we're going to go in with a darker green to put in the darks. And again, hence the yellow, a little bit of black. No, that's too thick, so I'm just dipping my brush in the water. And I may well just go over areas I've been on before and just darken them up a bit. So that little bit of dark here. And you can play with this. And the key is not actually in this bit down here. You need to leave some bits of white, but not that many. Don't think I've gone quite dark enough. Right, now this one's very dark over here, so I should put that in. Now I'm going to make that all dark. Then one under there. And I think here. Some stalks. This stalk should be darker. There's a stalk here. I know the stalks are actually brown, but it's missing something. It's too I think I'm being... Yeah. It's just... Right, I'm kind of playing now. This is when I really am painting to the painting. I don't know. I'm just gonna maybe smoosh some very light. I think it's just there are too many hard edges in here. So I'm going in, it's really, really watery. And just taking out some of the hard edges. Again, I'm not painting things at all right now. I'm just painting something that looks convincing. And one thing I think I will do is I'll add some, I think it needs some reds in this foliage. So I'm just dropping just little bits of red in. Actually, I think that might have been a bad idea. Right. Now, I'm kind of glad I've done that with foliage because I'm just going to quickly stand back. We're now going to smush up these flowers a little bit. This may ruin the whole thing. But I think the edges of these, even though this was kind of an exercise painting, I think the edges of these need a little softness to them. So I've got a damp brush. It's got more water on them than if you're actually mixing paint. I've just dragged it once over the side of the water pot. I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and mess up some of these edges. And once I've done that, I'm going to soften a little bit. This could be a terrible mistake. And out here, I just want to soften. I think that is better actually. I might go through the middle of some of these too. Just to get that to be a little more indistinct. I think they're too precise. My water's so grubby, I can't get a clean wash. Alright, put that on. Of course, I seem to be incapable of washing brushes at the moment. Alright, that's nice. Let's add it a little. Movement to everything. Oh, I shouldn't be using that one. Right, I'm just going to tidy up a little bit. I want a little bit of colour in that background, but I don't want hard edges. So. Don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's just what I thought was needed. Right, I'm going to stand back, see what that looks like. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I won't really know until tomorrow morning. But I think there's something there. Okay. Well, I hope that was fun. I'm not sure that flowers are ever really fun. They're quite stressful, but they're very satisfying. every time I do flowers, I always learn something new. There's just so much structure to them, so much form to them, so much emotion to them. They can be frustrating, but very satisfying too. Okay, well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that.